Welcome to this edition of the Disciple Making Leaders podcast. I'm Mike Keaton, and I am your host, and we're so glad that you joined us today. And I have the privilege to be here today with Ken Adams, lead pastor of Crossroads Church, founder of Impact Ministries. It's always a pleasure, Ken. Love these conversations we get to have, a lot of times in our own context, trying to figure out how to be disciple-making pastors, but and lead movements of disciple-making in our churches. But we definitely want to help how many we can do that today. So thanks so much for being with us today. And we've been talking, we've been in a series on trying to provide some resources on how to become disciple-making pastors. So why don't you describe a little bit of why we need that, and kind of what some of the ground we've covered already.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. That's good. And, I just want to echo, really and truly, our desire through all of our podcasts is just to share what we've been learning. And so we would say in a heartbeat that we have by no means figured it out. And we are not the authority on anything.
No.
But, here's the deal, man. After a while, we have learned a few things, and if that will help somebody else, then that's worth our time to do these podcasts, to share it with the people that watch it. And so we're glad that people are joining us.
Sure.
I've said for years that the really one of the cool things about our church, our location here at Crossroads, is that we have been a laboratory. And we probably know more about what not to do than to do. And so the really neat thing is that we've been able to be a laboratory, a research and development laboratory. So we are swinging at it really, really hard, because we believe that the local church ought to be a movement of multiplying disciples. And if that were to happen, if we were to have a whole planet full of people that were learning what it meant to be and build disciples, here's what would happen. That would change the world.
It would.
That would change the world, because here's what happens. Because when you start to change somebody from the inside out, guess what? That transforms the world we're living in. And that's why Jesus made it very clear that that was what the mission was. Jesus has the answer all along. What we're doing is that we're trying to do it a whole bunch of different ways. And if we get back to what Jesus said to start with 2,000 years ago, man, we could literally, but I say that, Mike, and at the same time, that's exactly why the enemy tries to get us off mission.
He does.
And if he can get us off mission, we won't do what Jesus called us to do to start with. So, back to your point. So, we believe that in order to have disciple-making churches, you got to start with disciple-making pastors.
That's right.
I can't tell you how many times I've had strong lay people in churches want to ask questions about how to become a disciple-making church. And I always say, if your pastor is not leading the charge, it isn't going to happen.
That's right.
In fact, I've seen sometimes churches with groups of lay people that really want to make it happen, and the pastor actually put the brakes on. That's just crazy, man. You do not want to be a pastor that's stopping the church from busting loose as a movement of multiplying disciples. You do not want that to happen.
No, not at all.
So what we've discovered is that a lot of times pastors are looking at this question of how do I lead to the church to be a disciple-making movement. And Jesus is the model for how to do that. Sometimes our seminary leaves us, and our theological training leaves us falling short. Sometimes the models that we've had before us fall short, not because they mean to, but because sometimes they just don't know how.
Right.
So Jesus gives us that model. Jesus is the perfect example. You look at the priorities that you see in Jesus, put those priorities in our lives, you're on your way to becoming a disciple-making pastor. We've been looking at these. Jesus, first thing Jesus did is that he led his disciples toward the mission. He made it clear. He didn't, there was no guesswork in what the mission was. Jesus led himself first. Jesus fleshed out what it meant to do the mission. Now, what a novel idea, right? That Jesus just did what he asked everybody else to do. If Jesus wanted us to be messengers, he was a messenger. If Jesus wanted us to be multipliers, he was a multiplier. If Jesus wanted us to be managers, he was a manager. Jesus washed his disciples' feet. He was a minister. Jesus modeled the whole thing.
Yeah.
He did self-leadership.
Right.
The third thing Jesus did is that Jesus led the organization. Jesus led the movement, the church, if you will. And so what that meant is that Jesus made the target clear. He made the strategy very clear. He made the environments clear, and he had a process for developing leaders. That brings us to our topic for today, and that is that we have to lead leaders. And then Jesus also had a plan, and he led well. But let's talk a little bit about leading leaders. Right?
It's such a huge. I mean, this is such a huge part of this process, because I've heard you say before, and I've heard other places, that no organization will outgrow its leadership foundation. So we've got to focus on leading the leaders.
Yeah.
And Jesus, again, is our model for that. So
Yeah.
why don't you unpack that a little bit for us and kind of explain, okay, how do we do that?
Absolutely. Think of it like this. If Jesus came to start a movement of multiplying disciples, and how many leaders did he have to begin with?
Well, really none.
0.
Right.
So Jesus started with 0 leaders. So here's what he did. So he made disciples, and then out of those disciples, guess what he did? He sent them out. He appointed them
Right.
to become leaders. And so Jesus needed leaders, and he got those leaders from the harvest, from the people that he reached, and then he equipped them and mobilized them to go out and continue the movement. That same process has to be happening today.
Yes.
It really has to be happening today. One of the best verses for this is in Mark chapter 3, verse 14. It says, "And Jesus appointed 12, whom he named apostles, so that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to cast out demons." So here's what happened. So Jesus, his whole strategy could be summed up in 2 phrases: with him, to send them.
Yeah.
And so we have to raise up leaders of other leaders. That's the only way a movement is going to be able to multiply. So if you go back to what Jesus did, you'll notice that there were 3 steps. The first was selection, the second was preparation, and then the third was mobilization. And so Jesus was raising up leaders of leaders because he picked the right guys, he picked the right people. Secondly is that he prepared them, he taught them what they needed to know, not everything they needed to know, but what they needed to know. And then the last thing he did is he mobilized them. He literally launched them out to start leading. And I would venture to say that there's a lot of pastors that are spending little to no time focusing on leadership development.
Yeah. And out of that process, what do you think would be where they would focus?
So I think first of all is that when Jesus was making disciples, I think that Jesus was doing the same thing that Jeremiah said in the Old Testament when Israel had taken its eyes off God. And Jeremiah says, the Lord says through the prophet Jeremiah, he says, "I will give you shepherds after my own heart that will lead you with knowledge and understanding." In fact, in my opinion, I think that's a prophecy that is fulfilled in Jesus, because Jesus is the perfect leader. He is the perfect disciple-making leader. He clearly has a heart after God. He has the knowledge, and he has the understanding to lead like nobody else ever did.
Right.
And so I think when we want to raise up leaders of leaders, we need to use a 315 model. And so what I think that means is that we need to help our leaders. Think about this, Mike. What if you had a whole church full of leaders, that all had the same heart, and that was the heart of God.
Yeah.
To see every person in every nation, in every generation, become a disciple and build more disciples. Oh, wouldn't that be incredible?
It'd be all about the mission.
It would be amazing.
Yeah.
And then, what if they all had the right information? What if they all knew how to live like Jesus lived, led like Jesus led, and and then leverage their influence the same way he did? And then, what if they all understood what it meant to have a shared vision and a shared strategy and a shared passion? I mean,
It'd be a powerful thing.
yeah. And so here's what I can tell you, is that leaders are not developed automatically. What a lot of people do, Mike, is, I talk to pastors all the time and I go, what's the biggest need in your church? And most of the time they don't say, we need more money, we need more buildings. They say we need more
Leaders.
They say we need more leaders. And so then you say, well, how are you going to get them?
Right.
Most of the time they want them from somebody else's church. Well, you know what? Jesus didn't have any leaders transfer in.
No, he didn't.
Jesus didn't swap any leaders from other churches because there were no other churches, man.
And some would even say that the guys he selected weren't
weren't very good.
Yeah, we're not going to get those guys.
Yeah. And so Jesus literally developed the leaders intentionally. He did that by spending 3 years discipling them. Well, first of all, he picked the right guys because he spent a night in prayer.
Right.
He spent a night in prayer. So Jesus was looking for guys that didn't have all the credentials, but he was looking for people who were hungry, who were faithful, who were dependable, who were available, who were teachable.
Right.
Oh my goodness. He looked for teachable guys.
So selection's key.
Selection is key. And then the second thing Jesus did is that he had a plan to train them. And that's what the word disciple means. It's the word mathete. It means to be trained or taught. Jesus spent 3 years modeling for them his character and his conduct, and then he turned them loose. He sent them out, and he said, go and do what you've seen me do.
That's right.
And so, I think a question or two would be that, is there in your, if I'm a disciple-making pastor, I want to have a process for investing in future leaders. And first of all, I want to have a disciple-making process that I'm really sort of building a pipeline for leadership development.
I was thinking a pool of people.
Yeah, you need a pool to draw from.
Right.
That's right. And so I'll be asking myself this question: do I have, first of all, have I defined what a leader looks like? And then do I have a process or a plan to help get them there? And so we have, for a long time, we have been trying to develop a leadership process. We call it 315 leadership.
Right.
We do it in our
off
church.
Of Jeremiah 3:15.
It's off of Jeremiah 3:15.
Right.
Yeah. And so we're also trying to help pastors become disciple-making pastors. We've started a thing through Impact called the Making of a Disciple-Making Pastor Equipping Group. And so we have online equipping groups. If you go to impactdisciples.com, you can get all the information you need. But we literally have pastors from all over the country, and actually even all over the world. One of our impact guys is leading a guy from Thailand through this. And we've had guys from New York, guys from Alabama. We've had guys from Texas, really all over the country, to come and join a 6-month online equipping group to just really learn the priorities of what it means to be a disciple-making pastor.
It's good. And our heart is really to encourage you to take a step and get into one of those groups. Not that we have the answers like we've already said, but to take what we have learned, share them with you, and even learn from you. But our heart is to help pastors become disciple-making pastors, because it will not go and move forward without it. So such a valid point. So we encourage you to go to the website, check it out, find out some information there, contact us, and we'll see about getting you hooked up into one of those groups. We're so grateful that you joined us again today, And as always, Ken, it's just great to have these conversations, and we're thankful that you joined us, and we look forward to our next episode and you being with us there too. God bless.